Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I want to beg your indulgence for about 90 seconds. Many of you in our congregation know that I just came home from Israel yesterday, led a rabbinic delegation there of 15 rabbis, and please God, 2 weeks from tonight, I'm going back with members from our congregation. It was probably one of the more powerful weeks of my entire life, incredible highs and painful lows. But there's one thread, one story that I feel compelled to share with you, and I think it touches on what Jonathan spoke about how tight-knit and small our world really is. On our first day, we went to an area, it's actually an entire office building of 7 floors that's been taken over in Tel Aviv, that is headquarters, central for all of the families of the hostages. Each floor is dealing with a different issue. They have international media, local media, people who have seen proofs of life and are communicating that, psychotrauma units for family. Every floor is dedicated. And there we met with 3 family members, 3 separate family members who have their loved ones that have been either held hostage or were sharing a story with us. The first person we met is a guy, big, makes me look small. His name's David Rosenfeld. He's one of 5 children, and 4 of his 5 siblings live in Kfar Aza, which is a kibbutz that abuts the border of Aza. He told us a story you might have seen on the news a few times. David has a sister and a brother-in-law, and they had twins that were 10 months old. Hamas came in to their home early, around 7:15 of the attack, and they murdered the husband and the wife. And then, I won't even call them animals because I find that an insult to zoos and to pets everywhere, that they actually kept the babies in their crib because they were crying, and they left them there for 17 hours. But the terrorists stationed themselves outside of the house so that when people heard the babies screaming because they were starving and dehydrated and in filthy diapers and no one was coming to get them, when people intuitively ran, the terrorists would kill them. And that is indeed what happened. And the way that they cleared out the homes was literally one by one when the IDF finally could get in. And they cleared out this home sometime way in the morning of Sunday, 16 hours later. And they captured these kids, they got them out, and they ran them to a staging center just outside the kibbutz at a gas station that we were at. And there, the people of United Hatzalah, and I want you to remember that because I'm going to talk about that in a minute, were the first to capture them and to triage them. And they didn't know what to do because even their most advanced paramedics said, we've never had to take care of a child where there wasn't a parent or a grandparent to tell us issues of the children. What are they allergic to? What do we know? What do we not know? And we found out how they triaged these babies, and they rushed them to Barzilai Hospital in Ashkelon, and they treated them there. And it was there that they found out a few hours later who else survived from the family and reunited these 2 twins with their grandparents. So David told us this entire story, and needless to say, there was not a dry eye in the house. We hugged him and we held him. And the next day, we went to Barzilai Hospital, and by chance, we met the neonatologists and the pediatricians and the trauma surgeons that helped these children and rehabilitated them when they came in, which is a really scary thing for a doctor that knows no history of the children and had to take care of that level of severe dehydration for them and nowhere for them to go, for them to hold on to. No one to put their loving arms around them in the crib that's part of their family. Needless to say, all Israelis did, but it was a felt absence. And to see those who treated them was pretty powerful. That night, our delegation sponsored dinner at the Hatzalah base that they've set up on the Otef of Gaza, where 250 Hatzalah trained paramedics are spending their off time taking care of wounded and injured soldiers and others who are having challenges physically or anyone else who lives in the area that they can respond to. And when we treated them to that dinner, we found the 2 paramedics and met them who had first taken in these babies and rushed them to Barzilai Hospital. The next day, all of us had to put on military helmets and flak jackets, and we took a tour of what is Kfar Aza. Now, as someone who's been to Birkenau more than 20 times, I was prepared to see devastation, But Birkenau is 78 years old, if you will, 78 years from liberation. And here we are, 10 minutes after the destruction in Kfar Aza. There was still blood on walls. There was glass broken. There were bullet holes freckled throughout every facade you can imagine, the size of double knuckles or a fist. And the entire kibbutz smelled of burnt wood and flesh, still. And as we're getting a tour from one of the people who survived, of all of the people who lived there, those who were murdered, those who were taken captive, those who survived, those who luckily weren't there that weekend, we're walking through the kibbutz very gingerly because we're literally stepping on broken glass and wood, and there are strollers that are overturned. There were kitchen tables thrown into the middle of the street. And they point out to a house and they say, this is the Rosenfeld house. This is the house where the twins lived. And we walked into their nursery and we saw where they slept. We saw where their parents would read stories to them. We saw the rocking chair that was burnt, that their parents must have rocked them to sleep on. And to see this thread go from meeting Devere to then meeting those paramedics that triage the babies, to then going to the hospital and meeting the pediatricians and the neonatologists that treated those babies, and then being in their house, was an unbelievable thread talking about this story. After Kfar Aza, we went to a small moshav north of Tel Aviv called Shvaim, where almost all the members of Kfar Aza who've been displaced are making their home, they're living there. And as soon as we walked into the lobby of this giant kibbutz hotel, I see a woman on the floor holding hands with two babies. And without introduction and without permission, I plopped myself down on the ground and I leaned over to the woman and I said to her, "Are you Devere's sister?" And she said yes. She was a little surprised, but it was clear that not much was surprising her these days. And I looked at her and I said, without questioning, made a statement, these are the twins. And she looked me in the eye, she didn't nod, she didn't say a word, but it was clear that they were. And then I stuck out my arms to one of them, and he waddled his way over to me, cruising, holding on to one of the couches, and I picked him up in my arms, and I kissed him on his kepi like he was my own. And he kept a keen eye on his brother. And here was this thread that kept linking from one step to the next step, to the next step, to the next step, to me holding this child and him flashing a smile, and you could see his baby teeth breaking through the gums. It reminded me so much of the brilliance of Spielberg in Schindler's List when he filmed the whole movie in black and white except for the one girl in the red coat that you followed as she made her pilgrimage into the ghetto, as she was wandering lost in the liquidation of the Krakow ghetto, and as her lifeless body was thrown into a pit. And what it reminded me of is that she was one of 6 million, and that the Rosenfelds are one story of 1,400. 1,400 stories just like that, and 239 stories of those who are held captive. And they all connect us, they all link us, they all draw us one to the next and make us realize that we are Am Echad, one nation, one people under the same God. The last point that gives an exclamation to this notion has nothing to do with the twins, but everything to do with the hospital. We went and visited about 7 or 8 wounded soldiers who were wounded quite seriously in the hospital, some who were getting ready for discharge into rehab, and some who were in severe ICU. One of them in the severe ICU was a young man named Ben, who made Aliyah on his own. He's what's called a Chayal Boded, a lone soldier. He came from South Africa. He was part of the Oketch unit. He works with specially trained dogs that can sniff out terrorists in tunnels, they can check around corners for dangers, and they are a team. This is a very elite unit. Sadly, Ben and his dog were hit by an RPG from Hamas. His dog Jack died, and Ben is in critical condition. His family got a call in South Africa that he was seriously wounded. They jumped on a plane with 4 hours notice and got to Israel. They were lucky that the plane took off that day to Israel. We sat outside the rabbis and talked to them for 45 minutes, just about everything they're going through in their story. And as I was getting ready to leave them, we had seen Ben, who was in very serious condition. We had uttered prayers for him, and we've checked on him every day since. He's in a coma and intubated. In leaving, I threw out the line, "You're from South Africa. You might know someone who works at our synagogue closely with me. She's my right and left hands. Her name is Shireen Kramer." And they said, "No, we don't know Shireen Kramer." I said, "Well, maybe you remember her from her maiden name," which luckily I recalled in that moment. I said, "Shireen Glass." And they said, "You mean Shireen Glass married to Rob?" I said, "Yeah." "The one with 2 kids, Daniel and Tamar?" I said, "Yeah." They said, "They stood up in our wedding. I stood up in theirs. They were there when our children were born. I was there when their children were born. We've been running so fast for the last 48 hours, we haven't called them yet and told them." So I called Shireen. I told her that we had connected, and I told her the news. And it just reminded me of how small our country is, not only physically, how small it is, but how small a people we all are. I have some fantastic news to share with all of you because I've been texting with Ben's sister every 3 hours. He is out of his coma. He is no longer intubated. He is in tremendous pain. He has a long road of recovery, but as I said to her, we have patience for a long recovery, and it will be step by step, day by day. But I think it reminds all of us that a soldier who's wounded in Israel causes pain to us here in America. And I mean that in most literal and in the most figurative sense. And it reminds us all that when we go to Israel or we advocate here, that we are doing this biyachad as one. So I thank all of you for the prayers, for the support, for the love that you have given in these moments and that we will give in the next 2 weeks. When I walked into hospital rooms and I saw cards littering the room with blessings from Hebrew schools and religious schools across the country for soldiers they never met, I realized it's not a war for Israel. It's a war for Judaism, and we're all in this together. So I thank you for being a part of it. I thank you for all of your support on behalf of the people of Israel who expressed that to us, and we do have a long road ahead of us indeed.